Hey guys, so welcome to the second video in this series of 4 videos about the 4 phases of your property business. Now in the first episode, if you didn't watch it, we covered phase 4, which is finishing your business. However, in this episode, we're going to talk about phase 3, which is protecting your business. And if I'm honest, this is where most people come unstuck. If you think about phase 4, if people get to 60, 70, 80 years old and the business isn't exactly what they wanted, then they can still course correct. They can sell a few properties, pay off some mortgages, sell them all off, put some money into some fixed rate bonds, etc. So it's not catastrophic if you don't hit the nail on the head precisely with finishing your business. However, so if you don't properly protect your business whilst you're building your portfolio, whilst you're building it, then you can lose everything. It can absolutely be catastrophic. And so in this video, that's what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to show you how you need to be protecting your portfolio, protecting your business, where most people never even think about the risks. But you only get one go at this. If you spend 20 years building a portfolio and then lose it all, some of us won't have time to restart again. So in this video, I'm going to show you how you can ensure that all the hard work you put in now building your portfolio is maintained into your retirement and is retained as wealth for you and your family. So what kind of risks are you protecting yourself against, or what kind of risks do you need to protect yourself against that you haven't done already? Now, some of you might have tenant insurance. You might have protected your tenancies by going to a rent guarantee company, or you might have taken out landlord's insurance. Most of you will have insured the properties because that's a legal requirement, but some of you would have protected the tenancies. My argument for that is, if you have a large enough portfolio, you can self-insure for stuff like that. But what lots of people don't think about is the longer term black swan events. Black swan events, by the way, are events that are very rare but have very severe consequences. For example, the tsunami in, I think it was 2004 in Japan, or the pandemic that's come around that has been predicted by quite a few people that we will have at some point a pandemic, or it could be the strength of the pound going up or the pound being devalued. It could be that the housing market crashes and people say, well, what's the chances? On a singular basis, a singular event, really low probability of us going to war, for example, or compliance changing. So the government perhaps bringing in regulated rents. We had it in the past. Could we have it in the future? Compulsory purchasing of second properties, for example, or perhaps the income being taxed much more highly from investment properties. And you might think, oh, what's the chances of that? There's a lot of chatter at the moment about capital gains tax being brought in line with income tax. For a higher rate taxpayer, that's a jump from 28% capital gains tax with a massive tax-free amount. If you're married, you can get a tax-free amount of £25,000, 28%, taking away the tax-free amount and jumping up to 45%. So some of these risks are quite draconian. What about the government bringing in some kind of additional levy on your business profits? Or how about they stop you getting relief from some of your expenses? And you go, no, you only pay tax on the profits, Frank. Well, that's not what happened a few years ago. A few years ago, the government popped up and said, actually, as a residential landlord, we are going to make you the only business in the UK that gets taxed before their expenses are deducted, and that's the mortgage rate relief changes. That's the Section 24 mortgage rate relief that's been removed. So now you can actually be a loss-making landlord. You can have a property that loses you money, but you still have to pay tax to the government. That is impossible in any other business in the country, to the best of my knowledge. And so these risks that we're mitigating against are real risks. The government has just, out of thin air, decided to bring out a tax on developers. You may have read about this. It's to pay for the cladding crisis that we have in the country on flats. But hang on, who made the rules about cladding? Well, it was the government and the quangos and the legislators. And so that problem was created completely innocently, but government's job is to keep us safe, etc. The developers built to the building regulation, but the building regulations weren't correct. They were unsafe. I think everyone can agree on that. And so now the government to be fair to them, they've put £5 billion into the pot to improve the situation and to rectify the buildings that are currently unmortgageable and unsellable. But they've also said that any developer above £25 million profit will have to pay an additional 4% tax on their profits. Overnight, 4%. Now that's big. Now you might think to yourself, well, I'm not making £25 million in profit, what's it matter? But these things can just come in overnight. That came in last week in the budget. I didn't know that was going to happen. I'm not a developer that makes £25 million a year, so it's not going to affect me. In fact, it might help me because I am a developer and I do build houses in competition with the big boys, and now I've got a 4% advantage over them. But they still have plenty of advantages. I don't think they're sat there in their beds worried about Frank and his 1 or 2 house developments. But my point is, anything can happen. What about those black swan events? Now, I'm not going to list all of them for you, but you need to be thinking about what might happen. So if property prices were devalued, what if mortgage lenders called in some of their loans? If you read the small print in your mortgage terms and conditions, they are incredibly draconian. Did you know that if you sold a property, most mortgage terms and conditions can keep 100% of the proceeds? Even if you've only got a 60% loan to value mortgage, most mortgage lenders have in their T's and C's that if you sell a property for 100% of its market value, they can keep the equity and offset it against other properties that they also have mortgages on in your name without you being able to do anything for it. They just whack up the redemption figure and retain all the money. So if you think, well, if rents drop or if rent regulation comes in, that's okay because I'll sell a few properties. It may not be as simple as that. And the problem with these black swan events is this: when one happens, often there's a cascade because then some other unlikely things happen because people panic, and you only have to look at the recent COVID-19 outbreak to see that that's the case. So how can you protect? I've probably scared you with what can happen, but remember, this can happen in any walk of life. We're not isolating this to property. Your employment can cease. You can get ill. And that was one that we spent quite a lot of time on Tuesday. What if you get ill? Have you insured against critical illness? Have you insured against death so that your spouse and your children, etc., are not lumbered with a massive headache? A portfolio that's in the building phase can actually be a massive headache for those left behind at a time when they're grieving, when they're struggling to cope with an already very emotional situation. And so, have you got critical illness cover in place? Have you got death insurance? Have you got life insurance in place? Have you mitigated against other risks? So for example, what's your loan to value across your portfolio? If it's at 75, 80, 85%, that's possibly a bit too highly geared for an aggressive building phase. Now, it does depend on your cash reserves, but have you got cash reserves? Have you got 6 months of mortgage payments across your whole portfolio sat in a bank account in case something goes wrong? Now, you might think, oh, what could go wrong? Do you know what? There's a million things that could go wrong. The legislation on evicting tenants is changing all the time. Do you know if you don't give an EPC to a tenant, it can void that tenancy? That tenant can actually sue you for all the rent they've paid on that tenancy, and for something as simple as an EPC, or failing to give them one. Now, you might give it to them, but if you haven't got a signature from them saying, yes, I've received it, how can you prove you've given it to them? Now, that might sound very draconian, but it is the law, as I understand it, and I've spoken to lawyers about this. It's never actually happened to me. But what if some massive law firm comes out with a no-win, no-fee and goes after all the landlords in the country, or starts chipping away at them, and it snowballs, it goes onto Facebook, and then lots of tenants try it on because they can suddenly get 6 months rent for free or refunded to them. So it's important to recognise that however good a business model is, and property is amazing, it's absolutely amazing, we need to be mitigating against the unexpected happening. So we talked a bit about health, we've talked a bit about having cash reserves, but what about having some money in precious metals? What about having some money in gold, for example? Perhaps not held in the UK, so that it's even more diverse than you might otherwise. Now, you might be thinking, no, I'm putting all my money into property, Frank. That's fine for now, But if you're 25, 35, 45, I think it's foolish to do that for the long term. Also, if you're wanting to pay down your gearing on your portfolio, my suggestion is don't take your whole portfolio from 75% to 70%. That's not actually that much safer. You're much better to leave the majority properties at 75% and pay some off completely, so you've got some unencumbered property, because that's far more versatile than having everything at 70%. The mortgage conditions could easily change, and overnight you can't get 75% loan to value mortgages, you can now only get 70. That happened in 2009, 2010. You could get mortgages, buy-to-let mortgages at 85%, no problem at all. In the space of about 2 months, those products just disappeared. It was all 75% loan to value. So anyone who had their portfolio at 85% or 80% could no longer refinance. So when interest rates were going up then, it was really hard to refinance, because all of a sudden they were coming off 4%, 5% mortgages and going on to 6.5% mortgages. It was really tough to, and that could be the difference between a profitable property and an unprofitable property. And you might think, well, that's okay, I'll pop in a bit of money, I'll just, top it up. But how do you top it up when you've got 50 properties or 100 properties? And that's what we're looking at. We're looking at how we can protect against threats to our business over the medium and long term. So if interest rates got up to 10%, how would your portfolio fare? How long could you last? If a third of your tenants stop paying because they've lost their jobs, or perhaps because Universal Credit has run out of money and is no longer being paid. There's a lot of reasons why things could change. How robust are you? I was once listening to a property speaker actually down in London, and he said there's a recession coming and then there's going to be a boom in house prices. The problem is no one knows when the recession's going to be and when the boom's going to be, because that's just the property cycle. And he said the trick is to survive the boom, as in keep buying, make your money, etc., and not get squashed like a moth in the recession. And in our next recession, we've had historically low interest rates for so long. In the next recession, and we're now heading into a period of inflation, which I've been predicting for 12, 18 months now. If you listen to the podcast, I was predicting this early 2020. I think I had my accountant on, Dave Allen, and we were chatting about how the government's going to use inflation to erode the massive debt that they've got. By the way, the government pushing inflation up erodes the government debt, but it also erodes our debts. So I have a lot of lending across a large number of properties on my portfolio. Those loans aren't getting any bigger. I'm servicing the interest on those loans, but as inflation goes up, as the cost of living goes up, my portfolio is getting more valuable. And so in real time, in real terms, my loans are getting less, because the example I use is a loaf of bread. If I owe £100,000 to the bank on a property and a loaf of bread costs me £1 today, the real cost of that loan, the real value of that loan is a lot less in real terms if in the future a loaf of bread costs me £2, because that means that inflation has doubled, which means that my £100,000 loan in effect is now £50,000, assuming everything else has gone up by the same amount as a loaf of bread. And so these things can work in your favor and you can really do well. Inflation's going to be amazing for me, because rents will go up because everything else is going up, wages are going to go up, etc. House prices will go up. Now we've seen a lot of house price rise and it isn't tied precisely to the consumer price index. So house prices are a bit of an anomaly, but we would expect them to go up over time if inflation is going up. And in real terms, my lending is going to get less. So my profitability will go up, subject to interest rates. My equity will go up and my loans will get smaller in real terms. That's a brilliant combination of positive factors. Now I mentioned interest rates. They're currently at 0.1%, which means that my mortgages are anywhere between about 1.5% and 5%. I've fixed a lot of them, but a lot of them are on variable rates. The profitability of my portfolio, which has been phenomenal for the last few years, is now much worse when interest rates are at 5%. Because all my variable rates that are at 0.5%, 1% above base, are now at 5.56% when they currently are at 0.6% or 1.1%. So that's going to have a big impact. But also the fixed rate products that drop off I'm not going to be able to fix them at 3.5%, 4.5%, etc. I'm going to be fixing them higher. So you need to really consider that. And when you're thinking about this, you need to be thinking big picture, long term. The Japanese are brilliant at having 100-year business plans. And you think, why do you need a 100-year business plan? You're not around in 100 years. No, but the business will be, the longevity of the business will still be there. And so when you're thinking about this, what could change over the next 20 years? Well, using second homes as holiday lets might not be allowed. Having more than one person living, more than one household living in the same building might not be allowed. And you think, HMOs, of course they will. I tell you what, if we have COVID-22 and COVID-23 and COVID-25, pretty soon we're going to stop living with people that we're not in the same bubble as. And so if HMOs were no longer available, weren't allowed under law, how would you get your high monetization going? And so it's important to structure your portfolio now in a way that's nice and diverse. If you buy all your properties in one town and then that town is designated as we're going to have a new nuclear power station there, or fracking's going to be huge, or whatever it could be, we're going to compulsory purchase that town and make it a massive prison. Who knows why? You are vulnerable. If all your properties are 2 up, 2 downs in a certain county, what happens if something happens to 2 up, 2 downs? What if the roofs that they were built out of are no longer stable? What if there's a problem with, I don't know what the problem will be, but that's the beauty of black swans, or the horrificness of black swan events, is we don't know precisely what it's going to be, but it will be there. One of the most common criticisms that's leveled at me as an investor is that I'm too diverse, that I don't actually specialize in anything. So I have students come along, potential franchisees, that say, do you know what, Frank, I've got more holiday lets than you. Or I have people that have more HMO units than me. But I'm not in the business of specializing in one kind of monetization strategy, because that's dangerous. Think about white collar HMOs in the pandemic. They were hammered. I know people that were at 50% occupancy. Try making money on that. Oh, hanging on by the skin of their teeth. Really, really precarious when you only have one strategy. I know people that are only developers. They don't have any buy-to-lets, and so they live and die by their next few deals. Whereas I have a single AST portfolio, I have a few HMOs, I have a big HMO, I have some small ones, I've got some holiday lets, I've got some tenant buyers, I've got some land, I'm doing some planning gain, I do the odd development, 1, 2 a year, something like that. I've got 2-bedroom properties, I've got 1-bedroom leaseholds, I've got 4-bedroom freeholds, everything. And you look at it and you think, oh, that's quite diverse. We're buying a portfolio of 27 units at the moment down in the southeast, quite high value properties. So that's quite good, because I've got the majority of my portfolio in the Midlands, because that's where I've largely been based. We're buying some very cheap properties up in on the east coast, the East Yorkshire coast at the moment. Very cheap properties. I wouldn't have bought those at the start of my career, but now it balances my portfolio quite neatly. So it's really important to think about what's likely to change, what could change, and what's very unlikely but would perhaps be catastrophic. And then you can put that all together into a plan. Now, you're not going to protect fully against all eventualities in the next 3 months. It would be unrealistic. But what you want to do is not, because you can't protect yourself fully, doesn't mean you shouldn't protect yourself at all. So perhaps you just get £1,000 a month of critical illness cover, just to ease the burden if you did get ill. And then next year you can get a bigger policy and it can pay you £3 a month. And the year after you can get a bigger policy and it'll pay you £10 a month. And then you're protected against critical illness. And then perhaps you need to change one of your properties. If you've got 10 at the moment and they're all on single ASTs to working couples, because that worked really well on the first one, so you did it again on the second and then you did it again on the third, perhaps you think to yourself, no, the next time one falls empty, I'm going to put a tenant in on universal credit, because a tenant on universal credit can't lose their job. Or perhaps you think to yourself, you know that nice property that overlooks the park, that's got parking not far from that theme park, or not far from that tourist resort, that tourist attraction. Next time that comes vacant, I'm going to try it as a service accommodation unit. I'm going to furnish it and see if I can get that going as an SA unit. So it's those kind of things, guys. Next time you sell a property, instead of buying another one, perhaps you pay off the mortgage on a different one, and all of a sudden you've got one unencumbered property in your portfolio that you can sell in a heartbeat, that you can sell in 48 hours if you need to, and pull in a big chunk of cash. It's important, guys. And if you choose not to think about this, if you choose to just listen to this episode and think to yourself, do you know what? That's Frank just being negative, or Frank just, being overly cautious. That is a criticism I get leveled at me sometimes. Then more for you when the Black Swan event does come around and you lose it all. Because some of you listening to this will do that. Some of you in the next 3-5 years will lose everything you have. And it's really sad. I spoke to a guy Monday this week, and he's possibly going to lose everything. He's going to lose his current project. He's potentially going to lose his own home. He's potentially going to lose some family members' homes that he's used as security. That's sad. That's really sad. And so if you want to protect against that, this episode is what you need to do. You need to be listing all of the potential threats to your business. What about if you get depressed and you can't get out of bed? What are you going to do then? Have you set it up in such a way, your business, that it continues to remain profitable, that it continues to grow without you? Or would it collapse? Have you made yourself the linchpin so that everything's on you? What if a family member got ill and you had to look after them? What if they needed 24/7 care? Do you have the resources to pay for that? If not, do you have the freedom of time and location to go look after them? Or would that just be catastrophic for your life and your business? I don't mean to be alarmist, but it's important to think about these things, because when we're thinking about the 4 phases of your business, there is so much time to get it right. We've talked about finishing your business, but now we're talking about protecting your business. Protect it 1% this year, protect it 3% next year, protect it 5% the year after. And when these things come along that flatten some of the investors that haven't thought about them, you'll be fine. And do you know what? If you're fine, you can capitalize on the market. I'm excited for house prices to go down. I'm excited for interest rates to go up. Do you know why? Because then I can buy more property, because I know that I'm in a strong position. I know that I'm protected against that happening, because I've had the forethought and the experience to say, this is quite likely. If I look back at the last 100 years, it is a cyclical property cycle. People always seem to be surprised when house prices go down. They seem to be surprised when interest rates go up. But of course, we're in a cyclical market, and so we should expect that. If we can help you with this, guys, if you have concerns about how to mitigate risk in your portfolio, if you know you're exposed and you want some help, then please do get in touch. We love to help investors, and of course, would love to hear from you. If you've got questions, pop them in the comments section below and we'll happily answer them for you, or we'll do a further video to help you. But in the meantime, guys, happy investing.